It was a sunny morning in June. Children gathered under a big tree in the park. Mrs. Green, their teacher, smiled at them. Today, she began, we will learn about some very special people. The children's eyes sparkled with curiosity. They loved story time with Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green continued, we are going to talk about divine masculine qualities. Do you know what that means? Little Emma raised her hand. Is it about being strong? She asked. Mrs. Green nodded. Yes, Emma, it's about strength, but also wisdom and courage. The children sat quietly, eager to hear more. We will talk about Jesus and Buddha, Mrs. Green said. They are spiritual heroes. They showed us how to be strong, wise, and brave in kind ways. Mrs. Green's voice was gentle and kind. She began to tell the stories. The children listened closely. They were ready to learn about these great figures and the special qualities they had. First, let's talk about Jesus, Mrs. Green said. Jesus was very kind and loving. She told the children about how Jesus helped people. He healed the sick and fed the hungry. Jesus showed strength through his love, Mrs. Green explained. Once, Jesus calmed a storm, she continued. The children leaned forward excited. His friends were scared, but Jesus told the storm to stop. And it did. The children gasped. That's an example of strength and courage, Mrs. Green said with a smile. Jesus also taught people to be kind and forgive, Mrs. Green added. Forgiving someone can be very hard, but it shows great wisdom. The children nodded. They understood now that being wise and strong wasn't just about physical power. Mrs. Green ended with a soft tone. Jesus showed us that true strength comes from love. He was brave and wise, and he used his strength to help and love others. Now let's talk about Buddha, Mrs. Green said. The children listened closely. Buddha was very wise. He taught people how to find peace inside themselves. The children looked thoughtful. They were quiet, absorbing every word. Mrs. Green told them a story about Buddha. One day, Buddha sat under a tree and meditated. He found a way to be calm and peaceful, even when things were hard. The children imagined sitting under a tree like Buddha, feeling peaceful. Buddha showed courage by following his own path. Mrs. Green continued. He didn't let hardships stop him. He kept going and shared his wisdom with others. The children admired Buddha's bravery and wisdom. Buddha taught us that wisdom comes from understanding ourselves and others. He was strong in a very quiet way, Mrs. Green said softly. Like Jesus, Buddha used his strength to help people find peace and happiness. Section 4. Meet Mr. Johnson, a modern-day hero. Mrs. Green smiled and said, Now let me tell you about someone you know, Mr. Johnson, Emma's dad. The children looked at Emma, who beamed with pride. Mr. Johnson is a modern-day hero, Mrs. Green said. Mr. Johnson works hard every day, Mrs. Green explained. He helps people in our town. Last week, he fixed Mrs. Brown's fence after a storm. The children nodded, remembering the big storm. He showed strength by helping others. Mr. Johnson is also very wise, Mrs. Green continued. He gives great advice. When someone has a problem, they often go to him. He listens and helps them find a solution. The children thought about the times Mr. Johnson had helped them. And he is very brave, she said. Mr. Johnson is not afraid to stand up for what is right. He teaches Emma and her friends to be kind and fair. The children saw Mr. Johnson in a new light, understanding his quiet strength, wisdom, and courage. Section 5. The Message of Appreciation. Mrs. Green looked at the children with warmth. Do you see how Jesus, Buddha, and Mr. Johnson have special qualities? She asked. The children nodded eagerly. They understood the importance of strength, wisdom, and courage now. It's important to appreciate these qualities, Mrs. Green said, not just in heroes like Jesus and Buddha, but in people we see every day like your dads. The children thought about their fathers and how they showed these traits. Your dads work hard and care for you, Mrs. Green continued. They are brave and wise, even in small things. The children felt gratitude for their fathers. They wanted to tell them how much they were appreciated. Remember to say thank you, Mrs. Green said. Let them know you see their strength, wisdom, and courage. It will make their hearts happy. The children decided to make a special effort to show their dads love and appreciation. Section 6. Every day is Father's Day. Mrs. Green smiled at the children. Father's Day is a special time to honor your dads, but remember, you can show appreciation every day, she said. The children nodded. They now understood the importance of daily gratitude. You can draw a picture, write a note, or just give a hug, Mrs. Green suggested. Small acts of love mean a lot. The children began to think of ways to show their dads they cared. Jesus and Buddha showed us that being strong, wise, and brave makes the world better, Mrs. Green said. Your dads do the same in their own way. Let's honor them every day. The children left the park with smiles on their faces. They were inspired to appreciate their fathers and all the wonderful qualities they embody. Every day was now a chance to celebrate their dad's love and strength.